She knew the rules, and she enforced them. But when a power-hungry officer stopped her and ignored who she was, things quickly took a dangerous turn. It wasn't long before karma caught up. The road was almost empty, just a stretch of highway cutting through the dark. The streetlights flashed by, their glow reflecting off the shiny black sedan, gliding steadily in the right lane. Samantha Carter had been driving for almost an hour, her mind still focused on the classified briefing she had just attended. Being the newly appointed FBI director meant long hours and even longer nights, but she was used to it. What she didn't expect, however, was the sudden flash of red and blue lights in her rearview mirror. Her grip on the wheel tightened slightly. She checked the speedometer, exactly 65, not a mile over. No erratic moves, no reason to be pulled over. Yet the police car behind her didn't budge. Sighing through her nose, she signaled and pulled her car to the side of the road. Years of experience told her there was no need to worry. She had worked with law enforcement her whole career. She knew the procedure. She understood the system. But as the patrol car stopped behind her, something nagged at the back of her mind. Why was the officer taking so long? Too long. Samantha adjusted her rearview mirror, trying to catch a glimpse of him. Finally, the officer's door opened. The man who stepped out wasn't someone she recognized, though that wasn't unusual. She didn't know every cop in the state, but there was something off about the way he walked. His movements were stiff, almost hostile. His left hand rested on his belt, fingers near his gun, while his right hand swung a flashlight back and forth as he approached her window. She pressed the button to lower the glass, keeping both hands on the steering wheel. "Good evening, officer," she said, her voice calm and professional. The officer looked down at her, the flashlight shining in her face. Too long, too intrusive. "License and registration," he said. No greeting, no explanation for the stop, just those words. Samantha held back a sigh. This wasn't normal. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" she asked evenly. The officer chewed his gum, staring at her for an uncomfortable moment before answering with the same words. "License and registration." Samantha didn't move right away. Her instincts, the same instincts that had saved her life more than once, told her this wasn't going to be a routine stop. She needed to take control before things escalated. "Sir, I'm reaching for my purse on the passenger seat," she said slowly, watching his reaction. He didn't respond. She moved cautiously, grabbing her wallet and offering her FBI ID along with her driver's license. The officer didn't take them. His eyes flickered across the ID and then back to her, his face blank. "FBI, huh?" he muttered. She nodded. "Yes, sir." There was a pause, then the officer said, "Step out of the vehicle." His words weren't loud, but they hit hard. Samantha blinked in surprise. "Excuse me?" The officer took a half step back, his right hand now hovering near his gun. "Step out." The tension in the air grew thick, pressing against her chest. There was no reason for this. She had followed every rule, identified herself clearly. But this man, this officer, was treating her like a threat. Samantha had seen this before, though not personally and not like this. She had read the reports, watched the footage. She wasn't about to be another headline. Her pulse remained steady, but her mind was racing through her options. She knew how quickly things could spiral. She also knew how to survive. Before she could decide her next move, the officer snapped. He reached for the door handle. That's when she realized this wasn't just a traffic stop. It was something else entirely. But Samantha wasn't going to let fear dictate her actions. She had spent her whole career preparing for moments like this, and she wasn't going down without a fight. The click of the door handle sent a jolt through her body. Not fear, not yet, but sharp awareness. Her left hand shot out, grabbing the inside handle before Officer Jack Harmon could open it. "Sir, step back," she commanded, her voice firm but calm. "You're outside protocol." Harmon didn't move. If anything, his grip tightened on the handle, his knuckles going white from the pressure. I said, "Step out of the car." Now she could hear the edge in his voice, the control he was trying to force. Samantha had dealt with men like him before, men who mistook authority for dominance, who pushed boundaries to see how much they could get away with. But this wasn't just some power-hungry bureaucrat in a suit. This was a man with a badge, a gun, and a temper that made him dangerous. She tightened her grip on the door handle. "On what grounds, officer?" For the first time, Harmon hesitated, his lips parted, seemingly scrambling for a response. But instead of answering, he did something worse. He took a step closer. The flashlight was still in his left hand, aimed directly at her face, blinding her to everything but his shadow. "I don't need to explain myself to you," Samantha said, keeping her gaze steady. "Actually, you do," the officer replied, his flashlight beam unwavering. His jaw clenched, irritation clearly taking over, replacing whatever control he had left. "Lady, I don't care who you work for," he growled. Samantha's heartbeat stayed steady, controlled, but she could feel the situation changing. This wasn't just aggression. It wasn't just a cop pushing boundaries. He wanted her to be scared, and fear was something Samantha Carter never allowed herself to feel. "Then let's call your superior and see if he cares," she said coolly. That set him off. The flashlight dropped, and before she could react, his free hand slammed against the roof of her car with a sharp, loud thud. The sound sliced through the night, echoing down the empty road. "I said, get out," he shouted. For the first time, Samantha looked at his nameplate. D. Kearns. She would remember that. Her fingers itched to grab her phone, but she knew any sudden move could be misinterpreted. She'd seen it too many times before. So she kept her hands visible, staring him down with the same intense look she'd used in countless interrogations. A look that cut through to the truth of a man. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice steady. Kearns let out a low, humorless chuckle. "Number. The mistake is thinking you can pull rank on me." That's when she noticed the shift in his stance. His right hand twitched near his belt. He was considering it. The air between them grew thicker. Then a second car pulled up, red and blue lights sweeping across the scene as another patrol unit came to a stop behind Kearns's cruiser. For the briefest moment, Samantha felt a rush of relief. Another officer meant a witness, meant accountability. But then she saw who stepped out. Another white officer, tall and broad-shouldered, with no nameplate visible in the glare of the headlights. Kearns didn't even glance back, and that told Samantha everything she needed to know. This wasn't backup. This was reinforcement. The second officer walked up beside Kearns, his eyes flicking between them before settling on Samantha. "Problem here?" he asked. Kearns smirked. "Just dealing with a non-compliant driver." Samantha stayed silent for a split second, weighing her options. She was outnumbered now, and Kearns knew it. The second officer took a step closer. "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle." Not FBI Director Carter, not even Miss Carter, just ma'am. She had been in dangerous situations before, but this felt different. This wasn't a hostile negotiation in a foreign country. This wasn't a tactical mission gone wrong. This was home. And right now, home felt just as dangerous. She inhaled slowly, calculating her next move. Because if she made the wrong one, she wouldn't be the one writing the report tomorrow. They would. Samantha could feel the tension building in her chest, thick and suffocating. The second officer positioned himself slightly behind Kearns, a silent show of solidarity. This wasn't about law enforcement. This was about power. Her fingers rested on the steering wheel as her mind raced, calculating the options. If she refused, they would escalate. If she complied, she would be at their mercy. There was no good choice. "Ma'am," The second officer repeated, his voice deceptively calm. "Step out of the car now." Samantha exhaled slowly through her nose, her pulse steady despite the warning signs screaming at her. She had been in negotiations where a single wrong word could cost someone their life. She needed to stay in control. With deliberate slowness, she reached for the door handle, keeping her other hand clearly visible. Kearns stepped back slightly, just enough to give her room. The moment her feet hit the pavement, the cold night air bit into her skin, amplifying the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She was vulnerable now. Kearns towered over her, his body angled just enough to block the dashcam's view. The second officer stayed a step behind, covering any blind spots. She had no doubt they'd done this before. "Turn around," Kearns ordered. Samantha didn't move. "You haven't told me why I'm being detained," she said, her voice calm but firm. Kearns's nostrils flared. "Suspicious behavior," he muttered, his smirk widening as if she were just another problem to deal with. Refusing to comply. It was a trap. Refusing to comply would justify their escalation, but complying would mean submission. She knew the game. She'd read the reports. Then, without warning, Kearns grabbed her wrist too hard, too fast. Her instincts kicked in immediately. Her body shifted just enough to pull back without seeming aggressive. "Get your hands off me," she snapped, her voice cutting through the night air. Kearns didn't let go. The second officer took a step closer. "We got a problem here," he asked. Kearns's grip tightened. "I think she's resisting." The words made Samantha's stomach turn. The second officer reached for his radio, his lips already parting to say the words that had justified so many senseless escalations before. "We have a non-compliant suspect. Suspect, not citizen, not FBI Director Carter, just suspect." And then the gun came out. Kearns didn't hesitate. His hand dropped to his holster, unfastened the snap, and before Samantha could react, the barrel of his gun was inches from her face. Time seemed to slow, stretching thin around them. Samantha had been trained for high-pressure situations. She'd faced cartel leaders, domestic terrorists, and violent criminals. But this was different. This wasn't a battlefield. This was a road in the middle of nowhere, and she was unarmed. Her breath stayed even, her hands raised and open, but everything in her body screamed to move, to react. But she knew how that would end. The silence was suffocating. Then Kearns spoke, his voice cutting through the tension. "Do you feel powerful now?" Samantha felt something shift inside her. This had never been about a traffic stop. It was about humiliation. Her vision tunneled for a split second, not from fear, but from rage. Not for herself, but for every name she had seen on reports just like this, for the people who never got to tell their side of the story. She opened her mouth, choosing her next words carefully because they could be her last. But before she could speak, a voice cut through the night. "Hey, I'm recording this." The shout came from somewhere off to the side, piercing the tension like a blade. It wasn't just the words, it was the force behind them. Someone had seen, and more importantly, someone had proof. Kearns didn't lower his gun, but the shift in his stance was immediate, a flicker of hesitation followed by a quick glance toward the voice. Samantha followed his gaze, barely turning her head. A man stood near the edge of the road, phone raised. The glow of the screen reflected off his glasses. He was at a safe distance, but close enough for every detail to be captured, close enough for the world to see. "You sure you want to do this, officer?" the man called out, his voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. Kearns' jaw clenched, but he didn't respond. The second officer took a step forward, shifting as if considering damage control. They weren't in control anymore. Samantha could see it in their eyes, the calculation, the panic pressing against their authority. They had gotten comfortable in the shadows, in the silence of unrecorded incidents. But this was different. Kearns exhaled sharply, his fingers still curled around his gun. His next move would determine everything. Samantha knew she had to push. "Put the weapon down." Her voice cut through the air, stronger than before. Kearns didn't move. His breathing was shallow now, his mind working overtime to find a way out. The second officer's radio crackled. "Unit 47, status?" Another heartbeat of silence, then more sirens. Faint at first, but growing louder. Reinforcements, but not the kind they wanted. Kearns's grip finally loosened. His hand dropped slightly, not holstering the weapon, but no longer pointing it directly at her. He turned to the second officer. "Get him to stop recording." Samantha's stomach twisted. She knew exactly what that meant. The second officer moved toward the witness, his hand reaching for something on his belt. No, not this time. Samantha took a step forward, her voice sharper than before. "Touch him, and I will personally have you charged with obstruction of justice." That stopped him for the first time. There was uncertainty in the air. The power dynamic had shifted, even if just slightly. The sirens were closer now, seconds away. Kearns wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking past her, toward the oncoming lights. His mind was already spinning, searching for an exit strategy. Samantha knew that look, desperation. And desperate men made reckless choices. She had seconds to make sure she got out of this alive. But was that going to be enough? The sirens were deafening now, the flashing lights bouncing off the pavement as multiple squad cars skidded to a stop. The witness kept his phone steady, the red recording light glaring like an unblinking eye. Samantha didn't dare move. Kearns was still holding the gun, but his stance had changed. The confidence, the untouchable arrogance had drained from his face, replaced by something tighter, something bordering on panic. Doors flew open, officers poured out, hands hovering near their holsters, but not drawn. They didn't know what they were walking into. Then one of them recognized her. Director Carter. The name sliced through the tension like a bullet. Kearns barely reacted, but the second officer stiffened. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The officer who had spoken, a lieutenant by the insignia on his uniform, looked between them, taking in the scene. Samantha standing with her hands raised, Kearns still gripping his weapon, the second officer hovering, unsure of what to do next, and the witness's camera rolling, documenting every second. The moment Samantha dropped her hands to her sides, it wasn't in surrender, but in reclamation. "Lieutenant, I want these officers detained right now," she commanded, her voice clear and unshaken. The second officer took a step back. "Hold on." "Not another word," Samantha snapped, her voice razor sharp, cutting through whatever excuse he had been about to offer. "I know exactly what this was, and so does he." She motioned toward the witness, whose phone was still trained on them. The lieutenant hesitated. Samantha could see the gears turning in his mind. This wasn't just a bad stop. This was a career-ending disaster for whoever let it slide. Kearns must have realized it too. His fingers finally uncurled from the gun, and he let it drop back into the holster. His movements were slow and controlled, but his face was filled with rage. Samantha held his gaze. This time, she wasn't the one afraid. "This is a misunderstanding," Kearns finally muttered, his voice low, as if he knew the excuse sounded weak. Samantha tilted her head slightly. "Oh, then let's clear it up at headquarters. Call internal affairs, call the DA. This isn't going away." The second officer swallowed hard, his face going pale. The lieutenant finally moved, turning toward the nearest officer. "Cuff them both," Kearns snapped. "You got to be kidding me," the second officer said, his voice raw, full of disbelief. The kind that comes when a man who's gotten away with everything suddenly realizes he won't. This time, Samantha didn't flinch. "You pulled a gun on the director of the FBI. Officer Kearns, let me know if you'd like to add resisting arrest to the list." She had spent her entire career watching justice almost happen, seeing cases get tangled in red tape, watching victims get treated like suspects. Not tonight. Kearns was still breathing hard when the cuffs clicked around his wrists. The second officer didn't resist. He just stared at the ground, like a man who had finally realized he'd bet on the wrong side. The lieutenant turned to Samantha. "Director, are you—" "Get them out of my sight," she said flatly. And just like that, it was over, or at least this part was. Because Samantha knew this wasn't just about two bad cops. It was about a system that allowed them to thrive. And she wasn't about to let that slide. But what came next was even bigger than tonight. The cuffs around Kearns's wrists weren't just metal. They were the weight of consequences, the kind he'd avoided his entire career. He stood rigid, his face twisted with disbelief as officers led him and his partner toward the waiting squad cars. He still thought this wouldn't stick. Samantha had seen that look before. Men like him always believed they were untouchable until they weren't. She took a slow breath, willing herself to stay composed. Anger wouldn't serve her now. Action would. The witness was still standing on the shoulder of the road, his phone now lowered but still recording. His gaze met hers. "You good?" he asked. Samantha nodded. "Thanks to you." He hesitated. "They do this all the time, just not to someone like you." That stung in a way she hadn't expected. Because he was right. This wasn't new. She just happened to have the power to do something about it. More officers arrived, some of them eyeing Kearns and his partner with barely concealed judgment. The lieutenant who had taken charge earlier walked back toward Samantha. "Director Caldwell," he started carefully, "do you want to press charges personally, or—" Samantha shook her head. "This isn't personal. This is systemic. I'll be filing an official report first thing in the morning, and I want internal affairs involved immediately." The lieutenant exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Understood." She wasn't finished. "I also want access to both of their disciplinary records, full transparency." The lieutenant hesitated. Samantha leveled him with a stare. "If you think I'm letting this get buried, you don't know who you're talking to." Silence, then reluctant agreement. "I'll make the call." "Good." Because this wasn't just about one traffic stop. This was about all the ones that never got recorded. The footage hit the news before dawn. By noon, the Justice Department had announced a formal investigation. Kearns was stripped of his badge and booked for assault with a deadly weapon. His partner was suspended indefinitely. The police department released a public statement, one of those carefully worded damage control statements. But the world had already seen the truth, and the truth had consequences. Samantha watched the coverage from her office, her fingers steepled under her chin. The story was spreading fast, and she knew what came next. The calls, the press conferences, the political maneuvering from people who would pretend to care while silently wishing she had just let it go. But she wasn't letting anything go. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. An unknown number. Normally she wouldn't answer. Tonight she did. "Director Caldwell." A pause, then a familiar voice. The witness from that night. "Just wanted to say I appreciate what you're doing. Most people wouldn't." Samantha leaned back, a slow breath leaving her chest. "Most people don't have the power to." A pause, then quietly. "But I do." And for the first time in a long time, she felt something close to hope. Justice doesn't happen in silence. It happens when people refuse to look away. Make sure you're paying attention. If this story moved you, share it, speak up, and never let the truth go unheard.